If we were to travel back in time 8,000 years, we'd witness an Earth that looked very different than the one we know today. We'd see massive megafauna roaming around. Humans with no technology except what they could make with their hands. And of course, the world would be much wetter. Today we'll be taking a look at some of the lost harbors from 8,000 years ago. We'll start off our list with what might be one of the most well-known locations on this entire list. This is the port of Newark, New Jersey. It was here 8,000 years ago that the indigenous Lenape people lived. They thrived in this area due to the abundance of resources that it had. But how did they thrive? And what do we mean by resources? The answer is quite simple. Just about any resource you can imagine, they had access to it. The land provided them with fruits, vegetables, nuts, and game. The creeks and rivers were full of fish, and the meadows and marshes provided ample hunting grounds for ducks, geese, and swans. There was also plenty of building material for constructing homes and boats and clay for making pottery. In fact, the Newark area was likely one of the densest areas of human habitation in all of North America during this time period. They had thriving villages all over the place. But just what kind of villages were these exactly? Some of the villages were made up of huts covered in bark and thatch. Others were made up of more permanent structures built from wood and clay. Many of the Native American villages in the Newark area were located along the waterways, as this would allow for easy transportation of goods and resources. The people who lived there would have used dugout canoes or other small boats made from reeds or other plant materials to travel around. And then finally, we have one of the most interesting aspects of the villages, namely their relationship with the sea. Since sea levels were much higher 8,000 years ago, the coastline was much further inland than it is today. In fact, the Atlantic Ocean was so close to the Newark area that many of the Native American villages were actually located on islands in the ocean. These islands are now long gone, swallowed up by the rising seas. But evidence of them can still be found today in the form of underwater archaeology. Researchers have discovered the remains of houses, tools, and other artifacts from these ancient villages at the bottom of the ocean. So while the Port of New York may not look like much today, 8,000 years ago it was a bustling hub of activity for the Lenape people. Next up on our list we have the island of Manhattan. Now when you think of Manhattan today, you probably think of towering skyscrapers, yellow cabs, and Broadway shows. But 8,000 years ago, it was a very different place. Back then, sea levels were much higher, so the island wasn't quite as big as it is now. And instead of being home to Wall Street and Central Park, it was home to a dense forest inhabited by a variety of wildlife. The Lenape people lived on the island, likely in small villages made up of huts or wigwams. Their lives revolved around the natural resources of the island. They fished in its rivers and hunted in its forests. The soil was fertile, so they were able to grow crops such as corn and squash. And the abundance of wood meant that they had plenty of material for building homes and boats. Even the island's diverse wildlife would have been a valuable resource for the Lenape. Animals such as deer and wild turkeys provided a source of meat, while smaller creatures like rabbits and squirrels were also hunted for their fur. The Lenape would have also made use of the island's vast array of plants. In addition to providing food and medicine, the island's plants were also used for a variety of other purposes. For example, the Lenape used the bark of trees to make canoes, while the reeds and grasses were used for making mats and baskets. Despite the challenges that they faced, the Lenape were able to thrive on the island of Manhattan for many years. However, 8,000 years ago, the island's environment began to change. The climate became drier and the forests began to thin, which made it more difficult for the Lenape to find food and shelter. Eventually, the Lenape were forced to leave the island and move to new lands. Today, Manhattan is one of the most densely populated places in the world. It's hard to imagine that 8,000 years ago, it was home to a small tribe of Native Americans living in harmony with nature. But this was indeed the case. The island's rich natural resources provided everything the Lenape needed to survive, and they were able to live off the land in relative harmony with the island's wildlife. The Lenape's deep knowledge of the island's plants and animals allowed them to make use of every available resource, and they were able to build a sustainable way of life on the island. But what if we went back 8,000 years, but instead of going to North America, we went down to South America? What would we see? Let's find out. We begin our journey in what is today the country of Chile. 8,000 years ago, This part of the world was a very different place. The climate was much wetter, and the landscape was dotted with lush forests and rolling grasslands. This was a time when the region was home to a variety of megafauna, including giant sloths and glyptodonts. These creatures roamed the countryside, leaving their footprints in the mud. The people of Chile, known as the Chilean hunter-gatherers, lived in small bands and moved from place to place following the herds. Their diet consisted mainly of fish and shellfish, as well as small game such as rabbits and birds. They also gathered wild plants and fruits to supplement their diet. The Chilean hunter-gatherers were nomadic people who lived in small groups of around 25 to 50 individuals. They traveled from place to place following the herds of animals that they hunted and the seasons of the wild plants that they gathered. Their settlements were typically temporary, lasting only a few weeks or months at a time before they moved on to a new location. These groups spoke a variety of related languages, and each group had its own unique culture and traditions. They were skilled hunters and gatherers and had a deep knowledge of the plants and animals in their environment. They developed sophisticated tools made from stone and bone that they used to hunt and process their food. They also created beautiful pieces of art, including petroglyphs and jewelry made from local materials. The Chilean hunter-gatherers lived a challenging life. They had to constantly move in search of food, and they were often at risk of being attacked by predators or rival groups. However, they were also free people who lived in harmony with the natural world around them. They respected the animals that they hunted and the plants that they gathered, and they took only what they needed to survive. And finally, we bring our tours of the world 8,000 years ago to one of the most iconic locations on our planet, the Great Pyramid of Giza. Imagine yourself standing in front of the Great Pyramid of Giza 8,000 years ago. You would have been greeted by a sight that was truly inspiring. Instead of the dusty desert landscape that we see today, you would have been surrounded by a lush green oasis filled with palm trees, flowering plants, and sparkling pools of water. The Nile River would have been wider and deeper, teeming with fish and other aquatic life. In the distance, you would have seen other pyramids and monuments, some of which were even taller than the Great Pyramid itself. The air would have been filled with the sounds of birds, insects, and the distant roar of the river. People would have been going about their daily activities, tending to their crops, raising livestock, and trading goods. The streets would have been bustling with activity and the sound of merchants hawking their wares. Children would have been playing games in the plazas, and the air would have been filled with the laughter and chatter of people from all over the world. The great monuments of Egypt would have stood proudly in the landscape, silent witnesses to the glory of a bygone age. The Great Sphinx, with its enigmatic smile, would have loomed over the horizon, and the temples and tombs of the pharaohs would have been scattered throughout the land. It would have been a time of great wealth and prosperity, a time when Egypt was at the height of its power. The pharaohs would have ruled over a vast empire that stretched from the Mediterranean Sea to the Sudan. They were considered to be divine rulers, and their word was law. The Egyptians worshipped a pantheon of gods and goddesses, and religion played an important role in everyday life. They built massive temples and monuments to honor their deities, and performed rituals and ceremonies to keep them happy. Overall, standing in front of the Great Pyramid of Giza 8,000 years ago would have been an experience like no other. You would have witnessed a civilization at the height of its power. A society that had achieved great things through hard work, ingenuity, and faith. You would have seen the Great Sphinx and other monuments that had stood the test of time, and you would have heard the sounds of life and commerce echoing through the streets. It would have been a truly unforgettable sight. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, check out another one of our videos. And if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe.